Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and this is Taking Care of Business. Joining me today is Jason Ribeiro, who is a doctoral researcher at the University of Calgary and a community advocate. And also, I might add, had worked quite a number of years with Calgary Economic Development. Thanks for joining us today, Jason.
Happy to be here, Mario.
I wanted to talk to you today about some of the recent things that have been happening in the Calgary and the Alberta economy. You know, we've had some major announcements here recently, with Amazon Web Services in Calgary, some accelerator fund action taking place in Calgary. Just overall, first of all, your thoughts on what's happening, and do you feel optimism and a good vibe going on there?
Well, look, I've always felt optimistic because I thought the bones of what not only Alberta was providing and also shoring up were strong, and same thing goes for Calgary. I think what we're starting to see, and this is, I think taken shape over a number of years from the early recession that we felt 2014-15 through till now, is that the calculus is changing related to not only economic development, but business development as well in terms of attracting companies here. And we've gone through a lot of growing pains, not just in reframing our thinking about how we attract these companies, but the reasons why they're coming. And that's very, very different from, let's say, in the 1980s, where I think our proportion in terms of our GDP, not only in Calgary, but in the province, was heavily skewed towards natural resources. Yeah. As that changes, as our economy becomes more diversified very slowly, you're starting to see us have to use new tools, new approaches to be able to attract these businesses. But to your earlier point, very, very optimistic about these announcements. And it's, in credit to a lot of hardworking people across all sectors doing the good work for the people of this province.
What's going to be the overall impact of these announcements, and probably more to come?
I think that at a macro level, when you think about the province and you think about our assets in traditional sectors like energy, agribusiness, and transportation and logistics, which has grown over the last few decades, as well as we've established ourselves as an inland port. And we're obviously challenged right now with what's happening in BC. It could be a lot worse if we weren't as well positioned as we are in TNL. But what's happening, I think, is we're starting to see digital transformation take shape across all of these sectors. And so for viewers who are watching, it's important to note that these are not just, quote unquote tech announcements. These are not just, we're not flooding kids with lanyards and t-shirts into all the office towers and across the province. This is taking shape in traditional sectors and emergent sectors and the creative industries like film and television. And so what's super, super optimistic, I think, about this picture that's taking shape is that energy, agribusiness, transportation and logistics, financial services even, are all going to benefit from announcements like the ones you just made, whether it be Amazon Web Services, whether it be Infosys, whether it be Emphasis. We're starting to build big investments in IT and software infrastructure that is going to help a lot of these large-scale employers transform their businesses into more digital-friendly businesses. And I think the gains from that, not just from an employment perspective, but from a GDP perspective, as we are set to lead the country in GDP growth in the future, these are going to be real tangible gains. I'll note very quickly, we led the country in GDP growth, or were projected to by the Conference Board, in number of years during the recession. But it wasn't realized in jobs. I think what we're starting to see is very slowly but surely that GDP growth is going to start manifesting in jobs. And boy, do we need jobs in this province and in this city.
Yeah. And when you look at, that word diversity, it's something that's been talked about in this city, in this province for quite a number of years. And many years ago, it was, it wasn't even considered, simply because the oil patch was so strong. But we're finally starting to see that happening, right? And do you think it's going to have a domino effect once more and more companies start coming here that are diverse companies outside of the oil patch, but maybe even connect in some way to the oil patch? There's like a snowball going down the hill and gathering momentum and building bigger and bigger. Is that happening? And you see that happening?
Well, let me back up. I think that part of the challenges, and this is why I think publications and interviews like this are really important in the work that you guys are doing, because if you take say from 1987 till 2018, a 30-year span, Calgary has diversified incredibly. When we think about the proportion of natural resources, and in there I'm putting mining, oil and gas, forestry. We've taken that down by 15 to 20% of our total GDP. And that's not just happened because there have been challenges. Those periods that I mentioned in those 30 years have been huge periods of growth for the oil sands and for our natural resources sector, but of course, a little bit volatile. I mentioned transportation and logistics has doubled its share of our city's GDP. When you think about financial services and the amount of headquarters that started to make their way here in the 90s, in the 2000s, to be able to support the capital that was accrued, not just on the enterprise side, but even in family wealth, that's even reached the high teens of our GDP. So part of the basic set of facts we have to make sure we understand is that Calgary's economy and Alberta's economy has been diversifying for decades. It's just happened very slowly, very quietly, and in some places very fast, but you don't know it when you see it. It's not like all of a sudden, a big company moves here, 10,000 jobs are there, and it's immediately felt. It happens by chipping away at some of these diversification efforts. So to answer the latter part of your question, yeah, very quietly, I think we've been seeing a domino effect for some time. The difference now, which I'm very pleased about, is that it's not as quiet anymore. Is people are getting loud, whether it's petrochemical plants, whether it's ethylene plants, all the way to these new economy types of company. We're starting to attract businesses. We're starting to be able to pair them with talent, which we have a huge educated workforce to do. But the work ahead is twofold. The work ahead means that we have to do a better job of recognizing these wins when they're happening, not just the big announcements with the politicians and everyone lined up saying glowing things. The local companies and success stories that have been happening right under our noses that are hiring 5 and 10 and 12 and 13 people. And you know what? Not all of them are going to be in Calgary, but their base is in Calgary, and that matters. Amazon Web Services announcement mattered a great deal to me because I knew a ton of Calgary tech companies and broader digital transformation companies that were Amazon Web Services partner before they even moved here. Now that they'll have that infrastructure here, they're going to be able to hire not only people in the city limits, but people around the world, because they now have the cloud computing power to be able to support these remote teams operating from all over the world, but home-based in Calgary. So I think we're going to see a domino effect. That domino effect has been happening for some time, but we have to recognize that when they're happening, we need to make sure that we're taking stock of them, understanding our economic mix, and then be very, very, I think, proud of the work that we're doing and not act surprised, 5, 10, 15 years later.
All right. Speaking of years later, when you look forward, say 10 years from now, what's Calgary's future economy going to look like?
It's hard to say. If you asked someone that question 10 years ago, I'm sure the answer would be very different. I think the at a macro level, at a 10,000 foot level, I think that there are going to be things that we can be incredibly optimistic about, because there are strengths now, and they were our strengths 10 years ago. I think the idea that we will have a strong, future-looking, future-forward energy sector is something that I'm incredibly optimistic about, not just from the Net Zero Oil Sands Alliance that's taking shape, the investments that are taking shape in decarbonization, but the fact that the world is now simultaneously in the market for two ends of the energy spectrum. The energy spectrum in traditional and conventional oil and gas, we've seen a huge uptick as of late. But also we're starting to see that shift towards, huge renewable projects like the Green Gate project in Vulcan, Alberta. We're starting to see all the way shifting into mining for electric vehicles, where we know there will be a huge demand. So I'm very sort of bullish about the fact that the energy sector is right-sizing its mix of investments all across the energy spectrum versus being very bullish in short-term gains for the next 3 to 5 years. The second point that I'm quite optimistic about is that we have a lot of people that are going to find new opportunities and new work in this province. What we cannot say anymore is that there are not going to be jobs. There's thousands of jobs available right now that will only increase, I think, in the short term into the near term of the 10-year time frame you just gave. And the question will be, will we meet the moment? Will we get people reskilling? Will we get collaboration across industry and the public sector to help people along as they transition into these digital jobs, into these green jobs, or into new capabilities for traditional sectors? That leaves me incredibly optimistic. And the third, I will say, is that I think we're starting to shift, and may not feel this way, to a little bit more stability in our political environment. If you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, we were gearing up to a very raucous political debate, not just in Calgary and Alberta, but across North America and the world. And we're starting to see some of the challenges that this winner-take-all zero-sum approach has had. My hope is that over the period of 10 years we're talking about, we start to shift towards, I think, a more pragmatic, moderate approach in how we build policy, in how we build businesses, and how we attract people into those businesses. And overall, paint a picture of Alberta and Calgary that is attractive for people to live in, to work in, build their families in. So yeah, myself and my family, I'll say, are incredibly bullish on this province.
Let me ask you one last thing, and it's a little bit just what you said, but I want to talk about the vibe in the city. Like, what are you sensing these days as you talk to people, your family, your friends, colleagues, business associates? What are you sensing in the mood these days?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? Like, I think that I talked to some people who are able to separate the signal from the noise. And so, yeah, there's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of nonsense going on. But look, I'm just focused on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are, for me, sorry to use a business term here, but the fundamentals are, for me, like, this is a very affordable place to raise my family. This is a great business community, which has new players and established players starting to merge, which we didn't really have for a long period of time. We really had, sort of not just a handful, but handfuls of people that played an outsized role in, I think, the thought leadership and business leadership in this community. We're starting to see new faces, new players. They're diverse. They have new perspectives. They've lived in other cities around the world and bring different perspectives. So there's that side, I think, that's focused on the fundamentals. And then there are others that are just really consumed and beaten down by the noise. The volatility that's happening, not only as we approach an economic transition, as we approach, I think, really, really important but volatile conversations about diversity, about inclusion, about equity, in terms of those who are being left behind, those who have been left behind for a long period of time, and have not had the system correct itself to be able to provide housing, to be able to provide the basics. So I think we're starting to see two conversations depending on who I talk to. But I will say, the one thing that I respond to them whenever I chat with them is that we shouldn't be waiting for Calgary to reach this kind of steady state where the brand is finally realized and we can sort of rest easy and not have these existential questions about who we are and what's our place in the world. I look back to our coat of arms, our motto, and it's this one word. It's ONWARD. It's onward. And it shows that we have this evolution built into us. That's how you see this place of Mohkinstsis, this meeting place, evolve into this saloon city, evolve into this connector railway city, all the way through to an energy, kind of superpower, and now into this place where it's got a little bit of everything for everybody. So yeah. I think I tell them not to overthink it a little bit. Focus on what's closest to you, your family, your job, and if you're doing meaningful work in your community with your family and your workplace, that's not a given in a lot of communities. So I think the rest sort of shakes itself out. And hopefully we just worry about doing the right things most of the time and less about these existential noise questions about who we are and what we should be.
Yeah, super. Well, thanks very much, Jason, for joining us today.
Thanks, Mario. Appreciate it.
All right, that was Jason Ribeiro, who is a doctoral researcher at the University of Calgary and a community advocate. I'm Mario Toneguzzi. This has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us.